So, as I said, thank you so much for coming to this webinar. We've got amazing turnout and the numbers are still going up. So this webinar is Exploring Nature's Calendar. Our two speakers tonight are going to talk to you about what Nature's Calendar is and a bit about what phenology is. They're going to say about how you can help, how you can record using Nature's Calendar, and they're also going to share some top tips about how to record. And they're also going to speak about what happens with those records, hopefully giving you a bit of motivation to submit them. And also they're going to talk about what the records tell us, what we've been finding out from this project. So you've got two speakers tonight. They are both called Kate, so fairly easy for you to remember, fairly easy for me as well, thankfully. So we also have, as I say, two speakers. We've got Kate Lewthwaite. So Kate Lewthwaite is Assistant Science Manager here at the Woodland Trust. And Kate has been recording a patch of snowdrops for Nature's Calendar for 17 years now. So hopefully you'll see why that data is so valuable later on. And Kate also has a PhD in plant ecology and environmental change. We also have with us Kate Warriner. Kate Warriner is our Citizen Science Officer for Nature's Calendar. She has a soft spot for amphibians because she previously worked on a really interesting project about toad conservation, which sounds like quite a lot of fun. And Kate also has a master's in applied ecology and conservation. So I will hand over to the Kates, and I hope you have a really good time.
Thanks everyone for coming. I'll just start by thanking our funder, People's Postcode Lottery, for funding our work. So Nature's Calendar is the UK's largest phenology database. Phenology being the timing of natural seasonal events. So there's an example on the screen of the image of the bluebells opening and flowering. So this is a seasonal event. Some other examples are migratory birds returning to the UK, or when the leaves start to turn colour in the autumn. And in the short term, we can look at the effects of UK weather on wildlife, and in the longer term, in the context of climate change. And our records do, as it says on the screen, go back to 1736, so we do have quite a lot to compare it with. So in the next 30 minutes, we'll have a look at the background and context of Nature's Calendar project. If you'd like to get involved, we'll look at some practical information, how to record, what to record, how your records are used, and some of the key scientific outcomes, and some time for questions, hopefully. So this is a timeline showing our database, really, and how it came about. It started with this guy called Robert Marsham. He was a landowner in Norfolk, and in 1736 started recording the date each year of 27 different indications of spring on his estate. These included things like the first snowdrop he saw flowering, the first leaf he saw on a silver birch tree, the first swallow that returned from migration, or the first brimstone butterfly that emerged from hibernation. And he did this for 62 years, which is quite impressive, until he died in 1797. Luckily, the successive generations in his family kept up this recording. So we have a record from that family all the way until 1958, which is quite impressive. You'll see on the timeline, the orange line is the Royal Meteorological Society, and they got involved in phenology in 1875 when they established a national recorder network. And they published annual reports up until 1948. And they asked their observers to record flowering of certain plants, the appearance of birds and insects. After that, in came the lovely Jean Coombs. Now, she started recording, amazingly, at age 11, but she didn't keep her earlier records because she thought they were a bit childish. Little did she know she would end up contributing this massive phenological record. So she's the purple line on our timeline. And since 1947, we have records from her of when buds opened on oak, ash, horse chestnut and lime trees. And she's still recording today. And her oak bud burst dates in particular have been really important. And we'll show you a graph of these a bit later. But they show a really interesting trend towards bud burst happening weeks earlier than it used to over the period of her recording. And this has been used by scientists, governments, and other research organisations interested in the impact of climate change on trees and wildlife. And Jean was awarded an OBE in 2009 for her services to phenology. So really remarkable. Then you'll see small yellow section on the timeline. This is the UK Phenology Network. And this was started by Professor Tim Sparks and the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology. And this is the start of Nature's Calendar, sort of in the present as we know it. And shortly after this, the Woodland Trust joined forces with them and it was renamed Nature's Calendar. And that's what we have today. So quite a span of time there. And this is just Jean Coombs's oak tree that she recorded. The picture on the side there is the oak tree, and she recorded the same one every year. And you can see, so the points on the graph are the yearly records, and the red line is the general trend. And obviously, year to year, there's quite a bit of variation, but the general trend you can see over 70 years is that this event has been occurring earlier. So that's really interesting. So as it stands now, the project records 69 species, quite a lot, and several different species events for each. Not all species have the same events. They're picked based on whether they be good indicators of seasonality and seasonal change. On the right of the screen is our calendar, which shows, you can find this on our website and you can download it if you wish. It shows all the events that we record on Nature's Calendar and sort of when we expect them to happen in the year. So moving on to more practical stuff and how you can get involved. Basically, it's quite simple. We recommend that you choose a few species out of the 69. Certainly wouldn't expect anyone to record all 69 species and all events, unless you have a lot of time. So we recommend you pick a few that you can see and observe regularly, whether it be in your back garden or on a walk or on your walk to work or something like that. And just keep an eye on them as the seasons change. Use the calendar to have a think about when you might need to start looking out for each event, and record the dates as you see each event happening. So I'm sure some of you, I think Becca said that some of you are recorders, but we thought it'd be useful to just run through quickly how to submit a record for anyone new. And we'll be using this guy as an example. I'm sure lots of you will recognise this bird. It's a great tit, and it has in its beak some nesting materials. So we'll be submitting a record for a great tit nesting. So hopefully this is going to work. Yeah. Yes, it has. So you'll need to go onto our website to submit records, and you will need to register on them. And then once you go to add a record, you'll see this screen and you can add something. We do have a guide online as well if you need further guidance. So you go to add a new record. First thing to do is find the species. So you can type it in. So in this case, great tit, or you can go directly into each category to find what you need. So go into birds, and there it lists all the bird types. And if you're perhaps not sure which species you've seen, it could be good to go this way. Each species has a bit of information next to it. So for the great tit here, I'll just pop that open, and you can just check that, have I seen a great tit? Have I confused it with something else maybe. No, I've seen a great tit, so we'll go with that. And then it'll list all the events that you can record for that species. So for this, it's either first nest building or first feeding young. And again, I would recommend that you go into the information, as this will tell you, hopefully work. I think my internet connection is a little bit unstable. Giving you guide for nest building. We don't just want to see when you see the bird in the nest. We actually need to see them with some nest in their mouths, because particularly blue tits and great tits, they sometimes can take a little bit of time to decide where they want to nest. So they might just be checking it out. So you click on the event and then pop in the observation date. So I'm going to say I saw it yesterday. And then it'll ask you when you last visited the location where you made your observation. This is just for data accuracy, really. We would ideally like you to be checking every week, once or twice a week, because this just means that it's more accurate. If it's more than 7 days since you've been to the place, this little reminder will pop up, just recommending that you look a bit more regularly, just because we can miss things. If you don't go to a place for 4 weeks, maybe the event might already have happened and you might have missed it. So that's for that. One other thing might come up at this stage. So just to show that, I'll just change the date here. So say I saw, instead of on the 6th, say I saw it on the 5th of March. Well, that hasn't done what I thought it was going to do. Ah, there we go. Do the 4th of March. So sometimes this will come up saying that your observation is out of date range. So for each species event, we calculate an expected date range. This is based on previous data and it's UK-wide sort of average. So it doesn't mean that your observation is wrong. It just means that it will go to our team just for double checking. And 9 times out of 10, we just approve it. It's absolutely fine. But yeah, it will come up with this. So please do add comments as much detail as you can, and maybe refer back to the guidance if you can, just to show us that you understood what you should be recording. So for this, I might put, oh, I'm in capitals, great tit, seen carrying nesting material in and out of the nest. And an image if you can. Obviously for a bird it's not always possible. And then you need to input your location. You can save locations, but this is the first record, so you won't have saved one yet. So you can pop in, you can do it by postcode or street or whatever you like. I'm just going to do work address. So we'll search for that. And you're looking to align this red circle with where your location is. The circle doesn't itself move. You have to click and drag the map. And as you can see, it'll move around. So I want it to be on that building. And then we go next. And then it'll ask you to give us a location, and then it'll save it. So I'll put work. And then you get a summary of what you have inputted. You can edit things at this stage and make sure to save the record. And there you go. You can then add another, or you can view all your records. As you put more in, more will appear here. So that's just a brief idea of how to record. We'll cycle through these. This is my backup in case the website didn't agree with us. Okay, so just a couple of things now to keep in mind to get the best out of your recording, really. I've kind of hopefully mentioned some of these previously. But it's probably easier to focus on a few events rather than go for the whole lot. And you can get to know when to expect them to come up and things like that. Make sure to check the species event guidance page. I didn't actually get to show you that because it wasn't working, was it? But you can find that on the website. Sometimes we do get a few sort of common records that are submitted slightly incorrectly, that are not following the guidance. So a couple of examples on the screen. You've got in the bottom left-hand corner, this is a newt, and we record the first newt that you see in the year. So when the newts emerge from hibernation in the winter, and we get quite a few records of newts much later in the year, maybe around autumn time or even in winter, when people have perhaps picked up a pot, disturbed a newt that's sleeping or overwintering, and then they record that. Really, we're looking for newts at the start of the year. Similar for the next example, which is a brimstone butterfly there in the middle. We're looking for the first brimstones that you see in the year, and they're emerging from hibernation, usually in the spring. We get a lot of records submitted in summer, late summer, and a lot of these will actually be the offspring of the emerging brood. So it doesn't tell us, it's not quite as useful from a sort of seasonal change point of view. So we tend not to accept those records. And the last one on the right, this is a black cap. This is a bird, it's a migratory bird, but it does also overwinter. So we have two options for recording. We have when it's first arrived in early spring, sort of February time, or if you see it throughout or in winter, you can record it all winter. So quite a lot we get people who submit sort of first scene recordings when really in the winter, when it should be recorded all winter. So just a few things there. Just always check the guidance and use the same location or specimen where possible. We recommend you use like a daily walk or look in your back garden, somewhere that you'll be regularly. On the right-hand side here is a picture of Kate Lewthwaite's famous snowdrops that she's recorded for 17 years. And this is the same patch. And that can be really useful because, even in the same patch, think of trees. You might get a few trees all in the same place and they react slightly differently. So it's really useful to have the same specimen being recorded year on year. Obviously, it's not possible for everything like insects and things, but yeah. And the last one, just check regularly so that you are getting the most accurate data that you can. So what happens to your records when you submit them? They go straight into our database. And we have this really lovely feature on our website, our live maps, and they should go straight onto there, unless they are one of those, unless they're slightly out of our date ranges. Once we've approved them, then they'll go straight on there. Yes, and this is really cool. You can go on there and search specific records, specific species and specific events. And we have a slider function so you can see how it changes through the years. So here's an example of frog spawn records from last year, 2022, starting the first record in southwest of England on the 9th of January. Not really surprising, it's quite warm down there. And then by the 24th of April, you've got all of the records there across the country. So, and then researchers, students, scientists, etc., can have access to all this data. And also on these maps, you can start to see interesting patterns and interesting things about the data. Here's an example of Swift records from 2018 to 2021. This is on the same date each year. And you can see there's some variation in the amount of records. And we try and highlight things like this where possible. So we've done a blog post on this one, for example. But certainly in 2021, there's a lot fewer records than there have been in previous years. So we could start to identify early, late years for some things and think about what's that due to? Could it be down to temperature and things like that? This is not perhaps not the best example of UK weather because swifts are coming back to the UK from the south, from Africa, isn't it? But still interesting to note. So I will pass over to Kate L now, I think, to explain more.
Great, thank you very much, Kate Warriner. I don't know if my picture magically appears once I start talking. I'm not quite sure how to do that, but I shall just keep going and maybe someone in the background can advise me. So Kate Warriner has shown you some records for individual species, like Jean Coombs and her oak tree. But what's the effect across many species? Can we say anything about what's happening in general? So all species respond individually, but they will have similar cues. And as the other Kate mentioned, temperature is a very important cue for activity in spring. Okay, so what we did was we took 4 species, all of which we had long-term records for, and we calculated a single date called the UK Spring Index. And this was for the JNCC, which stands for the Joint Nature Conservation Committee. And they are the public body that advise the UK government and the devolved administrations on nature and nature conservation. And you can see that they used our Spring Index as a biodiversity indicator, looking at the pressures of climate change. So it's great that government are taking these data really seriously. Okay, so when we calculated this, what did we find? Next slide, please, Kate. Okay, so this is the most complicated graph we're going to show you tonight. And if you get lost, then the main message is in the pink box to your right. So I'll start by talking about the vertical axis, the y-axis. And what we're doing along there is we're counting days after the 31st of December. So it's just a way of showing the date in a slightly different way. So on this graph, for example, day 110 falls roughly around the end of April, and day 140 falls around the end of May. On the horizontal, the x-axis, you can see the time period that we're looking at. And this is comparing the data from the Royal Meteorological Recording Scheme, where, again, there were volunteers looking all around the UK with our current Nature's Calendar project. You can see there's the big gap from 1950, where there was no organised recording, although we do have people like Jean Coombs and others who've sent in climate diaries or nature diaries. So what you can see, again, like Jean Coombs's graph, is there's lots and lots of variation year to year. We have weather in the UK. Boy, do we have weather. We have warm springs, we have cold springs. But actually what this is looking at is a much longer term change. So that's really what we talk about when we talk about climate. So what you can see here is the difference, the average difference between these 2 periods in our Spring Index is around 8.4 days. So that's really, really significant and should be a cause of concern for us, really. Next slide, please. Oh, what I should have mentioned is that these patterns seen in the UK are also seen in other European countries and actually right across the Northern Hemisphere in spring. So why does it matter that spring is getting earlier? Well, there are lots and lots of answers to that. And one answer is the impact on food chains, because all these species behave individually, yet they are all dependent on each other. And this was part of a really, really big study which used records from Nature's Calendar for oak first leafing and also records from the BTO Nest Record Scheme for the bird data. The RSPB also collaborated in about 5 different universities, and this piece of research was published in the very prestigious Nature journal. So what did they find? Next slide, please. So the overall finding was that oak trees were leafing in earlier springs when it was warmer, and that led to an earlier peak of caterpillar abundance. But birds were not able to react as quickly as the oak leaves and the caterpillars. So this creates a potential mismatch in the timing of natural events. And in fact, the earlier the spring, the harder it is for the birds to breed early enough. If you think about it, they've got a lot to do. They've got to find a mate. They've got to build their nest. They've got to lay eggs. So they need a much greater lead-in time than either the oak tree or the caterpillar. So again, this is quite a significant concern. Next slide, please. Okay, so this piece of research was led by Cambridge University. It looked at 400,000 of our records of plants, which covered 406 different species. And they found that comparing historic with current spring events, these events were happening a full month earlier. So yes, those results are slightly different from when we look at the spring index. It really depends what species you put into your analysis as to what you get out, but the overall trend is very much the same. Next slide, please. And so quickly bringing us back to the current time, if you're like me, you're lucky enough to remember what happened last year, let alone any years prior to that. And actually, that's why recording your observations is so important. But all of us will remember the absolutely blazing heat wave last year and how that was record breaking in many areas. In fact, I live near the place where the British temperature record was broken, sadly. But how did nature respond to that? Well, we saw in some cases a false autumn. So the summer heat wave led to autumn signs in trees, early tinting and leaf fall. But actually those were caused by drought rather than real autumn, if you like. And then later on, it stayed mild, but it became a lot wetter. And actually for the trees that had retained their leaves, leaf fall was quite late. The other thing that was notable about last year was we did get some records of unseasonal flowering. You can see a fruiting hawthorn in that picture at the bottom, but actually it's flushed some flowers as well. And we do see that from time to time, and that's known to be a sign that the tree or shrub is under stress when it's getting very confused about what season it's looking at. Okay. Great. Well, thank you so much for listening. I'm going to hand back to Rebecca now, who has hopefully been collating all your questions.
So the first question is the Woodland Trust a beneficiary of the People's Postcode Lottery? I don't know who's best to answer this, probably Kate Lewthwaite.
Yes, that's correct. They've been funding us for quite a long time now. They help to fund Nature's Calendar and quite a lot of our other activity as well. So that's why we have their logo and we're all nicely branded up. So we're extremely grateful for their support. Great.
Thank you, Kate. Maybe one that Kate Warriner, I've changed your name. Kate Warriner can take next. So this person has put down, an anonymous attendee has said that they basically would like to get their corporate colleagues involved in Nature's Calendar. They find it really interesting, this mass deployment of citizens contributing to the database. They would like to know, do we basically record for each individual? So is there something like some type of competition style report that can be organised for groups so you can see which individual has recorded the most?
Interesting question. Thank you. It's not something we've done before, I don't believe. Can certainly look into it. I don't think we have the capability for that at the moment. You can certainly look at your own records. It might be that you could organise that sort of yourselves. Kate Lewthwaite, am I right there?
I mean, feel free to email us at the project. Nature's Calendar at woodlandtrust.org.uk. As Kate Warriner says, we don't have anything set up at the moment, but we might be able to make some suggestions that would work for you. So we look forward to hearing from you.
Fabulous. Would one of you be able to put that email address in the chat for everybody? That might be quite useful if we have the email address and maybe the website link as well, while we go on to another question. So I will throw this one out. Where can people find the species events guidance page? Getting my words in a mess now.
Okay, well, if Kate's doing that, I will put the link to the calendar of events. So I will put that. Do you want it in the chat or the Q&A, Rebecca?
Chat would be fabulous, please.
Chat. Okay, I will pop that in the chat right now.
Lovely. There we go. We will link you straight to it.
Yeah.
Great. So let's get on with another question. So Eunice would like to know, if they're away from home, like when they go to visit relatives or if they're on holiday and they see, for example, a brimstone while they're there, can they add that to Nature's Calendar, or is it best that they're recording in their home area?
I'll take this one. Yeah, we would normally say it's best if you record somewhere that you are regularly, just so that you can check it regularly. But I mean, it might be that if you're away at your families, they might be confident they haven't seen a brimstone. You can always add different locations to your account. You just find it on the map and add it as a new location. That's quite easy to do.
Fabulous, thank you. Sounds good. So Kate Lewthwaite, I'll throw one your direction. So Vivian would like to know why bats aren't included in the species on Nature's Calendar.
Would you like me to answer that?
Yes, please.
So, yes, we get a lot of questions from people saying, why don't you record this? Why don't you record that? So there are several reasons. One is we do try and link with species that have been recorded in the past. So we've got that long-term data set. Mammals are quite challenging because a lot of them tend to have their young in secret, and you may not necessarily see them. You're right, though, we could record when bats are first seen leaving their roost. I think that would be quite a specialist thing. You'd have to probably be out every night with your bat detector. I don't know if that's something that the specialist bat conservation groups do. That would be my thought about that. So, yes.
Yeah, definitely. There's loads of local bat conservation groups that collect data and do bat mist nets where they trap them and they record data on them as well. So it's really good. Thank you, Kate. Gillian would like to know, do we know why the blue tits are not hatching out earlier? So why are they not hatching earlier to correspond with the caterpillars?
Yep, I can answer that one. So I think it's like I said, that they have a lot more to do. They have to find a mate, they have to build a nest, they have to lay eggs, and they have to wait for those eggs to develop. I also heard that actually cold weather is quite significant because the birds have to use a lot of energy for their breeding and nesting behaviours. They can't actually get started until the weather starts to improve. So they've got an awful lot of constraints that affect when they can get started, far more than the oak tree or the caterpillar. The one piece of really good news I did hear, though, this was from another piece of research using Nature's Calendar data by an academic called Jack Schutt. He found that blue tits are using the leafing of birch trees as a cue when to start nesting. So actually, that's quite exciting because that means to some extent they might be able to overcome some of these challenges and not be totally cued by temperature or light levels, but actually be cued by what's happening in their natural environment as well.
Oh, that's really good. That's great news. Thank you for sharing that, Kate. So I'll throw one in the direction of Kate Warriner, if that's okay. So we've had another question that has asked, are the records on Nature's Calendar shared with the local biological record centres?
I'm not sure about this one. I don't.
Sorry, we can pass it over to Kate Al.
Yes, we've had a few complications with sharing data more widely with the biological record centres. Our preference is actually to share with the National Biological, the NBN, National Biodiversity Network, which the biological record centres feed into. So that has been my ambition for more than 10 years now. We've always had certain challenges which we are now starting to overcome. There was a while when the NBN were not set up to actually receive phenology data, because most of their data is spatially based. That is now possible. We've shared small data sets with them, but definitely our ambition is to share with the NBN. We're also hoping ultimately the Nature's Calendar data will be just open source and anyone can grab any of it. At present, we share via, you send us an email, we send you back a couple of forms to complete, and then we send you the slice of the data that you're asking for. So that's how we're working at the moment, which is a bit old-fashioned, but we're getting there.
Thank you, Kate. So we've got another question. It's a really good observation, actually, from someone else that's come in anonymous. So they're asking, should we change our behaviour regarding hedge cutting if birds are nesting earlier and they're worried about hedges being cut too severely? There's not enough left for winter food and not enough depth to hedge for nesting. So should we be changing our behaviour to match the changes that we're seeing in our nature? Go for it, Kate.
Beck, I can answer that one. So forgive me, I can't remember if it was verge mowing or hedge cutting, but actually DEFRA requested our data so they could use it to modify the dates when these activities were allowed. Now, we might still say that they could do more, but it was really, really exciting to see our data used in that way, you know, in practical conservation, as well as perhaps more abstract citizen science research. So yes, it has been used in that way.
That's amazing. I didn't know that. That's really good news. So that's how it's influencing policy change as well, which is so important. So we do have just a few questions that I've got coming in, mainly kind of housekeeping questions, and we can answer them in one kind of fell swoop. Is this being recorded and will it be available afterwards, and are the slides available afterwards as well? So we can just answer quite a lot of questions that I've got by answering that one.
Kate, do you want to answer that one?
Yes, it is being recorded. I'm not sure how we're going to share it, but we'll either send it around or we'll put it on our YouTube, or it will be somewhere for you.
I believe it's going to be automatically emailed to all participants tomorrow. So I shall check that that's actually happened. So obviously that does include all the slides. If you particularly want our slide set, it's quite large. It's, you know, lots and lots of megabytes. So the best thing might be to email us and we'll work out something like a file transfer protocol or something to get it across to you. I think it's going to break everybody's email systems if we try and just email it to everybody. So on request, absolutely, drop us a line at Nature's Calendar and we'll send you the slides.
Fabulous. So we'll get back to our Nature's Calendar based questions. So another anonymous attendee is asked, does it matter if the same area is being surveyed by two separate people? And is there a way they can find out if other people are in their local area recording?
Hey, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, there's no restrictions on how many people in an area can record. We'd love as many people as possible to do that. You can obviously see individual records on our live maps, but there isn't a way to sort of access the information about that person because that's sort of personal information. So no, at the moment we don't have a way of connecting you, as it were.
Great, thank you. And someone else has asked, another anonymous attendee has asked, is early spraying having an effect on early bee numbers? Do we know that? Is that something we monitor within the project?
Yep, I can answer that one. Actually, I saw my first bee yesterday. feeding on some flowering. I'm afraid it's non-native, everybody. It's a non-native honeysuckle in my garden, but the bees are enjoying it. So we added the red-tailed bumblebee to the recording scheme about 15 years ago, because we thought that would be a very interesting indicator. The life history is that the female hibernates and comes out very early in the spring, and then starts building a nest and producing offspring. I couldn't tell you what the numbers are doing, but obviously that's the reason that we have got the red-tailed bumblebee in there. We also record queen wasp, so that's a similar life history, that she overwinters and then starts a new colony the following spring. So we have got those very early season insect indicators in place.
Fabulous. So we'll do a couple more questions before we close today. I'm apologising in advance, we won't be able to answer them all, but Kate has put the email address in the chat, so you can always email any of your questions over as well. So Anne has asked if they've observed a brimstone butterfly, they've added it to Nature's Calendar, do they look for it again? Is there any use to them recording a sighting again?
Kate Warriner?
I'll take that one. It would be once per year, really. So if you've recorded it already for this year, then it would be waiting for a similar time again the next year.
I suppose unless you've got multiple recording locations.
Yes, good point.
If you record in your garden and in the local park, then you could record it in both of those locations.
Great, thank you. I'm just trying to pick out some of the questions that are quite specifically about recording, because I see that would be potentially most helpful to people here in the webinar today. So Andrea has asked, at what stage should the snowdrop be at when they record it? Such as, should it be a bud burst, and how do they know exactly when that will be? So Kate I believe you might be the expert for this.
Yes, I couldn't believe I've been recording that same patch for 17 years. Doesn't time fly when you're having fun? So what it is worth doing is having a really good look on the website, because obviously to get good data, we're very specific about what we mean by things like bud burst, first leaf and first flowering. So it's really worth getting your eye in for what we're looking for. Generally speaking, with flowering, it's that so the flower is open so you can see inside it. So it's kind of reached a certain stage of maturity. Although I have to confess, which is appalling, I'd never noticed this with my snowdrops, is that they are one of those species that open and close depending on how warm it is. So they might be open one day and close the next, just to add extra interest. But I suppose what we're saying with this one would be, on balance, is it mostly open? Other species are less complicated.
Great, thank you. And there is a similar question about bud burst, which I feel might be useful to answer. They're asking, with a big tree, there may be bud burst on the high branches that you can't see. Does that matter? Is it presenting some sort of bias? Kate W, you happy taking this one, or would you like to pass it to Kate L?
Yeah, I mean, not something I'd really considered before, actually. That's an interesting point.
Yeah.
Kate L, any thoughts? I suppose it could be a bias.
Yes, and actually you can get the same with autumn leaves, that you can get the tinting on the far branch tips that are the most exposed. So I think within an individual specimen, you're probably wanting to look for what's typical for that whole tree, taking into account the branches that are higher up. Maybe you get your binoculars out, if you really want to do it carefully. It is, this is a science. It does take a little while to get your eye in, and we get these kind of questions all the time. And sometimes it prompts us to change our guidance. I need to change the snowdrop guidance, actually, because what I learned about what the snowdrops do. So yeah, I would say try and take the whole tree into account and use your best judgment is my best advice.
And I guess if everybody is recording from ground level, which we assume most people do, then it's going to be the same across the board. Everyone's recording what is bud bursting and what is tinting lower down the tree. So that evens out in the long run. And we're still looking at when you're looking at change, if you're looking at the same thing, regardless, you're still recording that change. So I'll take one last question and then we'll close up for today, because we do have quite a lot of questions coming in, but I can see the numbers on attendees are now dropping. So we'll take one last question from Charles, which is, do we have a list of phenomena, really strong with that word, you know what I mean, that are influenced by day length or temperature? So do we have kind of a list that differentiates things that are influenced by day length and those that are influenced by temperature? Kate W., do you want to take this one?
I'm not aware of a list like that. No.
I think it's largely known which species respond to day length, which species respond to temperature, which might respond to a combination of that. So you're right. I mean, those, obviously day length is entirely fixed and temperature is very variable, and sometimes other things come into play. I mean, the autumn is a lot more complicated than the spring because things like moisture levels come into account. So I think broadly speaking, we do know what the cues are for different phenological events, but we're still learning all the time, as with that blue tit example, you know, that they're learning from the birch trees. I don't think anyone knew that till recently. So it's a partial answer, but I hope it's useful.
Do you know the author of that study, Kate? Someone did ask.
Yes, that's Jack Schutt. And you can find, I will just pop the link in the chat very quickly before we finish.
Great.
Yeah, I'm just going to put the link to our different research reports, and you can find the blue tit and other research on that link.
Perfect. Thank you, Kate. And like they said, you'll get an email with the webinar information as well tomorrow. So that just leaves me to say a massive thank you to Kate Lewthwaite and Kate Warriner for taking time out of their day to share their knowledge and expertise with us. I can see it's been really valued. Loads of people in the chat saying how inspirational it has been for them, and how now they're going to do lots of recording for Nature's Calendar, which is fantastic. So lots of work for both of the Kates to be getting to tomorrow, I assume, for a full inbox and lots of records, which is absolutely fantastic. That's exactly what we wanted to do. We wanted to inspire and motivate you to help in this really important project. But also, if you've already been in part of the project, show you what an impact that you're having on kind of our findings and how they're then impacting change, such as Kate mentioning about the government asking for the data for them to change their seasons of when they will cut or mow. So thank you for coming, everyone. We are going to close up now. I hope you found it really interesting, and I hope you have a lovely evening. Thank you.